We'll move right into our program, and it's a great honor for us to be welcoming the U.S. Consul General Jim Dickmeyer to Mississauga and to speak this morning to our esteemed business colleagues here. After his remarks, he's graciously offered to participate in a brief question and answer period. So as you're listening to his remarks, you can give some considerations to some questions that you would like to ask him. And facilitating the Q&A is the individual who will be introducing him, and that person is Frank Carrico, the Principal Commercial Officer and Commercial Consul for the U.S. Consulate Office here in Toronto. Please join me in welcoming Frank.
Thanks much, Sheldon, and to the Chamber for having us here this morning. Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Jim Dickmeyer, who's our Consul General for the U.S. Consulate General here. As such, Jim has a lot of responsibilities. All of our different agencies that are located within the Ontario province report to Jim here, including, for example, not just mine, the Department of Commerce, but also like the Customs and Border Patrol group as well. So you can imagine these are quite a bit of responsibilities. Today, we're asking Jim, because this is the Chamber group here, to focus as much as possible on our mission priorities with Beyond the Border and Regional Cooperation Council, which has a lot to do with moving products and people, accelerating the movement of these products and people across the border, and getting standards to come together. To that end, we have also have another guest with us from our consulate this morning. This is Patricia Feets, who will, after Jim speaks, she will also make some remarks which are very important for people, executives working in the United States and Canadian executives and U.S. people on her visa programs, especially e-visas as well. And then finally, I do want to recognize my colleague in my office, Doug Jacobson, wherever he may be, a very important person in my office. And beyond that, I would just like to welcome Jim to come to the platform and make the presentation. By the way, in Q&A, if you have questions during the presentation, if you want to ask questions during this presentation, that's perfectly all right. We want to keep this as informal as possible. We want to focus on those questions that have a lot to do with moving people and products across border and how we can help your companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. Sheldon, thank you for you and MBOT for organizing this and inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk about some things that I think are quite important as I'm learning in my 3 months that I've been here. I get 3 years here. I'm trying to squeeze as much out of every month that I'm here because I'm delighting in this job. I think I've kind of fallen into heaven, and it's partially because it's Ontario, partially because I just get to do this kind of fun stuff all the time and get free meals, so I appreciate all of that. Also want to acknowledge Karen, because you always want to, the next power person coming into office, and so it's nice to sit with you, Karen, this morning and have that chat with you. Frank introduced the colleagues here, and we do want to do this kind of as a team effort. This is really an information session, and in that spirit, I'm as interested in your points of view, your issues and your comments about your experiences in dealing with the U.S., dealing with the border, your businesses and so on. We are looking at this coming month in December. There will be a report following last December's announcement by Prime Minister Harper and President Obama about an action plan beyond the border. In my 28 years of diplomatic service, I've never seen a piece of paper quite like that in terms of its specificity of action, handed down by 2 chiefs of state, giving basically instructions to their bureaucracies to get going. And there will be a scorecard for the first year. There'll be a report that comes out in December. So all of us, and I'm speaking out here with colleagues from the Canadian government too, are working real hard on that action plan. And I encourage you to go look at it. It's on everybody in the world's websites, certainly on the Canadian government's, ours, State Department's, Department of Commerce. And it is a very far-reaching agenda that deals specifically with what you're here to discuss today, as doing business with the United States. It talks about security, it talks about a lot of things, but in the end, it's about doing business. I think there's a recognition. I think there was an ambassador soon after the events of 9/11 who said, you know, I'm sorry, U.S. ambassador that said to his Canadian audiences, I'm sorry, you know, security is always going to trump trade. That just doesn't have to be. They can both prosper. We can have greater security, and actually with greater security, we can have easier and better trade. And that's the vision of Beyond the Border. The idea is that we create, between Canada and the U.S., and cooperation on all kinds of fronts, the law enforcement front, customs front, movement of people across bridges and waterways and through the air and a front, we can create a secure environment for all of our citizens in our two countries, and at the same time create mechanisms that facilitate the amazing union that already exists in terms of partnerships on trade, partnerships in companies and movement of people, and we can facilitate that even more. Another program, and we'll talk a little bit more about Beyond the Border, and some of the things that you'll be discussing today with experts can give you some sense of some of the movements that's going, the CPAT program and others, where we're looking at areas in which you as an exporter don't have to go through two bureaucracies to get your product from one country to the next. You do it with one. It's a one-stop. Same thing in terms of, and many of you may have already traveled on Nexus cards, or we call ours global entry. The two governments recognize that kind of trusted traveler program from each other. You don't have to go apply for two. One works. It's that kind of thing where there are already elements out there, but the action plan really has been building this year kind of the basis for a lot of implementation that we'll see in 2013 and 2014. But already some of these actions are out there, and we're going to want to discuss those with you. In addition, there have always been tools out there in terms of how to facilitate movement, and Tricia will talk about a number of kind of our visa categories and programs that you may not know about that actually have been in existence for a while. Some of them, through her efforts and that of her colleagues, are getting a nice kind of revitalization in terms of the information going out about how to use those. But I want to step back and talk just briefly about the bigger vision. I spent the last 2 years in an academic environment, and that has its benefits, but it also, you know, the ivory tower kind of thing, and you end up kind of looking at the big picture kind of. But that's, I think, useful here for the moment in talking about Beyond the Border. When I was teaching national security studies for the last 2 years to active duty military, international, and U.S. and other executive branch people, we talked a lot about national sovereignty. You do when you talk about national security, you talk about sovereignty. And we talked a lot about how has that concept changed? How is it changing? The internet changes sovereignty. Who owns the information? Who owns the channels through which that information flows? The movements of people, the multinational companies, where are they really? What's their real national loyalty or origin, a multinational company? All of these kind of issues of sovereignty are very important because basically since the 1600s, we've kind of been working on the concept of nation states. We all feel part of a country or nation. Beyond the Border is actually taking our two countries in an area, a new area of kind of how do we conceive of sovereignty. And it's a natural progression of the deep relationship and partnership we've had for so many decades. But it takes it in a way that structures it so that, in essence, the two countries have said, in some ways, we will cede a certain part of our sovereignty because the partnership is so deep. We'll cede that kind of our particular national sovereignty to a partnership kind of sovereignty. Give you an example. We have a program, again, coming out of this that's now in place and very successful called Shipwright. Law enforcement personnel for both countries are on a ship in one of the international waterways that separate our countries. Let's say they're on a U.S. ship, a Coast Guard ship. They're Canadian officers, U.S. officers. That Coast Guard ship is in U.S. waters and it picks up, is in pursuit of some criminals on a boat, and they cross into Canada. What happens? That ship is then put under the command of one of the Canadian officers on that ship. But all the officers on that ship are authorized to conduct law enforcement activities, arrest the bad guys in Canada, or vice versa. If they caught them in the U.S., the Canadian officers there are part of a team in a partnership to go and arrest that people. Now that may sound logical to you. It's like, well, of course, we don't want criminals to escape across an international line, but it isn't common. And it wasn't even easy to get this kind of agreement with a relationship that is so close as we have, and so much trust. Well, it's an example of where we're going, I think, in the relationship. Another kind of fun example that's been in existence for a long time, NORAD. I think few people remember or understand or ever knew that when 9/11 happened, and we were looking to get control of the skies and figure out who was in the airspace of the United States, good and bad, the person in charge of that effort was a Canadian military officer. Because of the structure of NORAD, that's the trust that had been developed there. And again, I think if Americans knew that, it's like, well, that doesn't sound right. That's not, we have our own military. Why aren't? Again, it's a changing concept of sovereignty that I think is essential for us. And I think we have to be on the alert of kind of the reaction of going, ooh, that's not right. Americans can't come up here with guns and arrest people. We're Canada. Well, if it's done in a way where both countries have set out the structure of that and agree upon that, then it's good. Okay. So the idea is to create that kind of environment, that kind of space. And then within that space, how can we then facilitate movements of people, goods, to some degree even more so finances. We know capital moves quite easily and frequently between countries, but specifically goods and people. And that's kind of what you face, I think, a lot of you that are looking at doing business in the United States. How do I get my goods across? Or if I have a supply chain and implements from the U.S., how do I get them to my factory at the right time? If I have operations in both countries, how do I get my employees that I need to go over and do this particular job across without a border agent from one country to the other saying, oh, no, we have our own labor laws here, you can't just come over here and work. How do we get all that to work more easily for you? And again, that's within the structure that we see under Beyond the Border. I think about my experience as a diplomat, where I've gone to 6 different countries, and I kind of fly in, and I've got a support platform of the embassy or the consulate. It kind of helps me ease into the country a bit. But even with that, I think about how difficult it is to get accustomed to a country, to get settled in a country, to understand it well enough to do my diplomatic business. And I put myself in your shoes as business people. And I think you parachute into a country, and how do you figure out how you're going to do business? So you have trips where you have people take you to China and you go to India and so on. And that's, I think, helpful and opens up. But it is a complex, and I don't have to tell you this, I'm just kind of saying I think I understand a bit about how daunting it is to go in and try to open up business in a foreign country. As we look to double exports from the United States, one of President Obama's targets, double exports in 10 years, we're telling American businesses, 96% of which do not export. Only 4% of American businesses are involved in export. I suspect it's not a dissimilar, maybe a little less, but the majority of Canadian companies probably do not export. Why? Well, again, I try to put myself in your shoes. If I've got a good sales stream going in the country, and I'm busy, it's not like I got a lot of free time, why would I dedicate myself to trying to figure out a whole nother country, a whole nother set of rules, a whole nother block of regulatory and legal issues if I'm doing well? So how do we encourage, in our case, how do we encourage some of the 96% of U.S. companies to look at exporting? And one of the ways we do is say, look at Canada. Yes, it's a different country. Yes, it has some differences in terms of its legal structure and so on. Yes, you need to understand it's a sovereign country and you need to deal with it that way, but there are many, many similarities to how we do business in the United States, to how our legal structure is set up. There are huge ties in terms of companies and people upon which you can draw. So look to Canada. So I'm delighted that there's a focus here today for Canadian businesses to look to the United States. I think there's a sense that, and I understand, and I certainly would encourage anybody to look at these vibrant markets and these huge markets of China, Brazil, India. It makes sense to look at them. But it's not like we've each, in our trade partnership between the U.S. and Canada, squeezed all of the opportunities out there. In fact, I would say there are probably more opportunities than there were 10 years ago, just the way business is. And I would say that one of the things I keep hearing from a number of business people is, I think I need to partner with some people to then attack, then go out into the broader world. That it would be useful for me to get partnering with maybe a bigger multinational that understands China, but I get in part of their supply chain. Through getting in their supply chain, my products then enter into China because of the way they're doing business in China. How can I partner with some other companies so that we leverage the collective mass of that we can put together to better enter the country, so that not each one of us is trying to figure out the regulatory part and the legal part. We each are hiring lawyers and so on. How can you do that? Again, part of Beyond the Border initiative is looking at, let's leverage this partnership that exists, has existed for so long, into dealing with what is a very increasingly complex world. Why not, where it's easier to partner, because we have the history, we have the tradition, we have many of the same kinds of rules and regulations, and from that launch out to where it's more challenging. Again, I'm just, you all as entrepreneurs will make your decision on that. You know best how to do it. It just seems to me, standing back, again, kind of with my academic hat, a logical kind of way to go. So I'm delighted that you're looking at how to do business better in the United States. And I promise you, we are working on how to facilitate doing business between the two countries. And again, I encourage you to look at that. We are trying to gather together as many kind of good stories, examples of how Beyond the Border already is improving the environment for trade between the two countries. I've given you a couple in terms of law enforcement and in terms of movement of people. The CPAC you'll hear about later in terms of movement of goods. There's something pending, an announcement in terms of moving of small packages, facilitating that kind of movement. There are a number out there. If you have more interest in knowing of those, we're happy to talk with you more. Frank and his team, the economic, political team in the consulate can help. We have web pages and so on.
Now we're moving on to the rest of our program. Now we've had some challenges with one of our speakers today, but Darren Gurd is going to have a backup speaker to cover Michael Lehar's presentation. I'm not too sure who it's going to be as yet, but Lindsay, you probably know, but I'll let you maybe introduce the next portion of our agenda.
Morning again. Wayne Hofstad has 30 years of experience in the industry, and he's going to share some of his knowledge and pitch hit for Mike Lehar, who had some flight troubles, connection troubles. So please bear with him and us. do have 30 years of experience on hand, and also Derek Ferrari is also on hand to answer questions towards the end of the presentation. He has 25 years of experience as well with Derringer. Thank you.
The exporter, oftentimes today, because we're moving more into an electronic environment, the exporter will transmit his customs documents to the broker, who then has the opportunity to pre-arrive the goods, if you will, in that the entry or the release is set up so that when the carrier comes forward with his PAPS code, it's all matched. It goes to the BCS, and e-manifest goes to the CBP targeting center. And this is where a decision is made to release or inspect the goods. So at that stage, the notice comes back out to the border port of entry that perhaps FDA or one of the other government agencies would like to inspect the goods, and carrier would back in, and the goods would be inspected. Release would be authorized, and down the road he goes. This is all done for the most part against either the broker's bond or the individual importer of records bond. Today, it's the importer of records bond. Most of the brokers today use their own bonds only in a situation where an emergency requires them to do so. And I might add, they make a hefty charge. So it's recommended that you secure your own bond.
Very much, Sheldon. Good morning. Adam Novak, CQ&B Group. We're a commercial insurance brokerage. Not only commercial, we provide all aspects of insurance. However, we tend to specialize in commercial products and services. So thank you. I'm very pleased to be included as part of this event. Thank you, Sheldon. I love my industry, my occupation, because I get to meet and conduct business with such a vast diversity of energetic and genius entrepreneurs, usually, not unlike the folks here in the room. So, which leads me to a story that I heard years ago that I think depicts the spirit of entrepreneurs and at its best. This is a short story about Colonel Harlan Sanders, that dapper white-suited gentleman with the white goatee who began selling fried chicken from his roadside restaurant in Corbin, Kentucky during the Great Depression. Colonel Saunders was an early pioneer of the restaurant franchising concept, with the first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise opening in Utah in the early 1950s. Its rapid expansion saw it grow too large for Colonel to manage, so he eventually sold it to a group of investors. Despite this, his image was still used in his branding, and he worked as a goodwill ambassador for his company until shortly before his death. The Colonel attended his last regularly scheduled physical with his doctor, and his doctor gave him some bad news. He said, hey, Colonel, you've got 6 months to live. With this news, the Colonel decided there were several things in his bucket list that he just needed to do. So he called his assistants and advised them to set up a meeting with, of all people, the Pope. He said the Colonel always wanted to meet the Pope. So even the Vatican enjoyed the odd bucket of chicken eventually, or once in a while, and certainly knew who Saunders was, so the Pope granted him a visit. Saunders and his assistants flew to Rome and proceeded to the Vatican. Once inside, they were asked to meet the Pope in this massive, impressive hall. Kind of like that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Yeah. The Pope, along with several aides, enters, and they exchange pleasantries. Curiously, the Pope asked Saunders as to the reason of his visit. Saunders humbly admitted to his business successes and suggested that, as a result, he would like to donate $10 million to the Catholic Church. Everyone in the hall gasped and was stunned at this announcement, and the Pope thanked Saunders for his kind gesture. Saunders pipes up, but there is one condition. He says, what's that, everyone asked. He says, well, you know where in the Bible it says, give us this day our daily bread? He says, well, I'd like you to change it to chicken. Everybody, whoa. Give us this day our daily chicken? He says, well, the Pope quietly takes, taken back by this suggestion,
says to the Cardinal, he says, well, this is quite an offer, but I'm going to have to consult my Cardinals in order to move this further. So take my car and go and visit the local sites, the Coliseum, the Leaning Tower, do the things, you know, that you like to do as a tourist. And for a couple of hours, why don't we discuss this, and I'll get back to you, you know. So the Pope summons all his cardinals, and they immediately congregate for the emergency meeting with a lot of buzz in the air as to why. The Pope enters the room and announces that there's been a generous donation of $10 million offered to the church. They all cheer and rejoice. This is monumental. The Pope says, not so fast, there's one catch. One of you are going to have to talk to the Wonder Bread account. Never take anything for granted, you know? I hope to share with you some of my thoughts and observations of what implications you might encounter with your insurance providers by venturing your business and expanding into the trade areas of the U.S. The allure is great, the consumer base is bountiful and eager to purchase new products and services. It's needless to say. By sharing the world's largest unfortified border, I had unprotected earlier, but our Consul General corrected his notes to say unfortified, and I thought that was appropriate. It makes absolute sense that the U.S. is our largest trading partner. Let's look at some of the factors that you should consider before taking that leap, if you will. First off, cost. Insurance costs, and a lot of people don't understand the triggers that generate costs. So I'll share with you some ideas here. The lion's share of commercial insurance for companies entering into the U.S. market is allocated to commercial general liability insurance. Coverage which is based on the volume of, price based on the volume of goods and services sold. Regardless of the nature of the product, there's a significant rate increase compared to Canadian sales for the same product. In some cases, it might be as modest as twice the cost, possibly 3 times the cost, but it's not uncommon to have certain products as high as like 10 times the cost. So, you know, things like vital automotive parts, farm machinery equipment, medical devices are amongst the highest. This contributes to being a significant influence on the product selling cost, at times overlooked and often underestimated by manufacturers once they sell the product. I always suggest to my clients not to dabble in the U.S. market. If you're going to do it, if you're interested in it, commit to it and sell as much as you can to the U.S. For that reason, insurers charge a minimum premium for any shipments to the U.S. If it's an exposure, they want to charge for it because they know it's a different marketplace up there. So, you know, in order to make it economical, you must spread the cost over a larger sales volume. It's a simple thing. The designated states that you sell to can also be a cost factor in your equations. And some states are less costly to do business in as compared to others. Off the top of my head, I know that the states of Florida, Texas, and California are those states that really have a high liability rate if you're selling to those centers. They're higher than, you know, say, the Midwest, for example. If you have an opportunity to influence what state your product is limited to, you may dodge some of those costs. So, you know, watch your shipments accordingly. There's another item called absolute liability that I'm going to speak about a little bit, and this is vital because it's different than what we have here in Canada. The United States is known for its litigious society, so you must prepare accordingly if you plan to sell anything south of the border. You will deal with elected judges, potentially ruling in favor of their constituents, as opposed to you, the foreign manufacturer, whose product has caused some bodily injury or property damage to one of their own. Think about it. The judge wants to get reelected, and it might be a little bit of a bias. The concept of absolute liability applies to products introduced into the U.S. marketplace, regardless of how innocuous a product may seem, or how well you have labeled it with what you consider appropriate warnings. If it causes any injury, not only are you exposing your company to significant defense costs, but also massive court judgments. A couple of cases, these are real cases. 2 Florida neighbors share a large hedge between their properties, which they trim regularly. Having spent hours trimming, they both decided that it might be appropriate that they help each other, they lift the lawnmower, and use the lawnmower as a hedge trimmer if they walk both sides of the hedge. Serious, true fact. So they started the mower on the ground, and when they attempted to pick up the lawnmower, they cut off the ends of their fingers. Resulted in a huge settlement. A Pennsylvania farmer noticed his eaves troughs were coming loose from snow and ice one winter. And he said, well, I better get up there and better nail those eaves troughs back on. So he grabs his ladder, and it's a ladder, extension ladder. Happens to be 3 or 4 feet short of where he really needs to be. Looks over to the side, and he notices his manure pile is there, right? Now this is middle of February or March, so it's frozen, so it's about 5 feet tall. He puts the ladder on top, gets to where he needs to be, everything's cool. If any of you are from rural Ontario, you'll know that, you know, a manure pile never freezes, right? The crust freezes. I mean, but anyhow, he put the ladder in that, got up almost to the top, and of course the ladder sunk through the manure pile, toppled him over off, broke his hips and whatnot. That man got paid generously by the ladder manufacturer because the ladder wasn't labeled that you should put it on firm ground. Now, if you go to Rona or to Home Depot now or to any one of those establishments, take a look at the labels on the ladders. They're bountiful. The same with the lawnmowers. I mean, and that all results from this sort of activity. Huge lawsuits. Limits of liability. This is something that is often overlooked. People here in Canada will buy limits in the millions of dollars. So you purchase $5 million of protection against anyone else suing you, or you can purchase $10 million, and usually intervals of $1 million. If entering the U.S. market, my recommendation is that you double the limits that you would normally purchase for the Canadian exposure. Keeping in mind that liability coverage not only pays for the court costs awarded, but it also provides for the defense costs that are imposed on you in the court system down there, which amount to huge bills. Some time ago, I had a shoe importer insured locally. They imported shoes from overseas and sold them in the Canadian marketplace. Not to the U.S., but in the Canadian marketplace. A U.S. shoe company turned around and felt that one of their products was very similar to that of the Canadian company, and actually sued them, filed a claim in the New York court for patent infringement. This New York court had no jurisdiction over the Canadian company selling in the Canadian marketplace, yet my client had to spend upwards to $100,000 to post a defense to alert the courts down in the U.S. that they had no jurisdiction. Otherwise, the New York court would have actually found him guilty of patent infringement and claimed accordingly, even without jurisdiction. So $100,000 doesn't seem like much to some, but it's a big dent to many. I'll talk about patents and trademark infringement. I mean, that's something that, again, as Canadian manufacturers, we have to be very conscious of. The U.S. is so fast with opportunities, and in the same breath, it's full of challenges, traps, and perils. I recommend that you have your product researched by a proper patent and trademark lawyer thoroughly. There are several capable law firms here in Mississauga that specialize in and are well equipped to research and advise you in this area. We are seeing an increase in the activity in this exposure. Some suggest that it may just boil down to protectionism due to the current state of the economy in the U.S. I would say that probably has a bearing on it. In the interest of time, this brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. I don't think there's, you know, I just kind of touched on the high points, a real high-level sort of discussion surrounding insurance. It's not the sexiest topic, but after hearing our friend from Derringer, it's sexier than Derringer, or I should say maybe pray forward. If there's any questions, I can take any questions now, or you can talk to me afterwards, by all means. There's a link, I guess, to our website if you need to have any questions answered. And I hope that this brought another angle to today's presentation that you might have not considered. By no means did I intend to slight our neighbors to the south with any of my comments, or anyone else for that matter. We love our neighbors to the south. As a matter of fact, during a recent shopping trip across the border, my wife's purse was stolen, her credit cards, the wallet, the whole shooting match. I didn't report it for 3 months as the thief was spending fractionally of that, what my wife usually spends. So, with that in mind, thank you.
Great.
And Sheldon, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Adam. Give Adam a round of applause. I think what is sexy is when businesses can take advantage of their opportunities, do it right, and make lots of money. That's when it becomes sexy. So Adam is here to answer any questions. Wayne's here. Again, it's interactive, so if there's anything that anybody wants to comment or somebody else in the room wants to share some insight on something that they know that may not have been covered here today, this is a good opportunity. We had programmed for you guys to be here till 11:30, so by all means, we don't need to keep you here till that time. But if there's any questions, comments, or anything else someone would like to share, this would be the opportunity. Great, at the back. You can stand up and yell.
This is a question for Adam, and I just wanted to, double check, see what you covered. But do you get into cargo insurance at all, or?
Absolutely. We, our firm does everything insurance related. As a matter of fact, we do provide transit coverage in cargo, ocean, marine for shipments worldwide. We are totally prepared to do any of that. We have a whole division associated to international business and cargo and transit business for it.
Okay, so ocean, air, do you do ground as well?
Absolutely. We cover many shipments through the U.S. and into Mexico by ground. Mexico serves as a whole other challenge. You know, that's an interesting concept once you hit that Mexican border in El Paso. So by all means, we do everything except lend money.
It's not a comment, it's just we're a customer of CQ&B Group out of Waterloo. We deal with the Dean Medical Officer, so they've always been giving us really good service. We transport product that's valued at about $270,000, and his team right on the ball every time we need anything. They respond back to us, and we do benefits too, health benefits as well. So it's kind of nice to know that when we need them, they've been there to help us out, because our stuff is really hard to insure and stuff. So
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Agree with you, Adam, to pay for your customers to come here. That concludes this morning's session. Thank you all for hanging around. I know it was a long morning, and certainly we appreciate you being understanding of the changing speakers that we had this morning. But as I said in my introductory remarks, this is part of an ongoing program that the Mississauga Board of Trade will continue to deliver to help support businesses, to take their businesses more global, and to help connect you with resources that can help support you in doing that. I'd like to extend my appreciation once again to our sponsors, to Derringer. Give them a round of applause. We appreciate your support. I know that they want to continue to be very actively engaged in helping to support us, to support businesses in our community. So we'll be seeing and hearing a lot more from them, as well as to the Mississauga Business Enterprise Center. Give them a round of applause too. And with that being said, on behalf of the Mississauga Board of Trade, thank you for joining us. We wish you a great day and great business, and we'll see you all soon.